Welcome to the People Relations Podcast, the podcast series brought to you by People Relations HR Consulting, where we talk with business and HR leaders around the globe. In each episode, we will discuss exclusive insights, strategies, and advice to help you make better people decisions in your business. For show notes and incredible bonus resources, simply visit www.peoplerelations.com.au. Okay, let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the show. We are delighted to have you join us for another exciting episode. I'm your host, Pam Costa, and today we have the privilege of welcoming Rachel Woodhatch. In the last decades, she contributed significantly to companies such as Microsoft, Fitness First, Nissan, and Leonardo, driving initiatives that have shaped the future of HR in these organizations. Rachel, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Pam.
So to start, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you embark on this remarkable career?
Well, it's a pleasure to join and share my stories and hopefully, allow people to learn something from my personal experience. I never set out to work in the field of human resources. So I have been in the field of human resources or people leadership now for over 20 years. I started as a business analyst, post a commerce degree, and have worked quite broadly. I sort of started in London, working in some hedge funds and in retail for High Street Woolworths PLC, before coming back to Australia into Perth and starting in mining pretty much when the mining sector across the east was unheard of. And I was very fortunate to start as a HR officer, working on some great tools back in the early 2000s, and then really springboarding back into Melbourne to work in engineering, and then starting a career in HR management and then leadership. I've been fortunate in the sense that I've worked predominantly in listed and private entities. Most of the entities have been global businesses, very much best practice. And then I got a little bit bored and I wanted really to work across whole of function. So over the last 10 years, most of my career has been building subsidiaries for global companies in the Australian New Zealand region, very much end-to-end, a lot of challenges working with boards, CEOs, managing directors to really identify the people risks and really add a lot of value. Obviously working with PE-backed companies next to a very established wealthy companies like some of the businesses I've worked in, Microsoft, Nissan, very well-backed, very highly mature, very established. It's a very different journey, sort of transforming and working in greenfields entities. So I've been very fortunate to, I suppose at this stage, sort of 20 years in, have the whole array of people leadership across small, medium, and very sizable entities, and added exceptional value, as well as built some great teams and HR professionals. I've mentored, I've coached, I've developed, and I've still got a lot of energy to still go. So I've recently returned to Sydney to be based where my partner has his legal practice, and very much looking forward to sort of the future of HR and grateful for my profession to this day.
How exciting, Rachel, and what a great career journey so far. Not only exposed to very different type of business industries, but also globally as well. And you moved around Australia quite a lot as well in different states. So that's fantastic. Rachel now based in Sydney, exciting times ahead. And in your role as a business leader in all these last 2 decades in HR, what do you see are the people management challenges that you have encountered within these organizations, and how did you address them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think working the last 10 years in sort of startup and PE-backed companies or enterprises, especially global, going into the Australian New Zealand region, a lot of the challenges is firstly around getting the investment to invest in all of the people leadership sort of initiatives that you need to really build a great culture and sustain a sort of startup enterprise. And that's really the challenge of working with the executive and board and some of those global partners to build a really robust leadership team in region, as well as understand the legislative landscape. So I would say one of the key challenges that I've seen working across a few startup global enterprises is probably a lack of appreciation or difference for the Australia-New Zealand region. We are quite progressive, comparable to the UK and the States, next to some of our European counterparts, not all, but obviously, especially in private and listed enterprises, especially more in the professional space, where we have a lot of white-collared professional employees, we're far less unionized than some of those environments. So really the influencing piece to board, global counterparts, partnership with CEO is really critical, probably much more so. So from a HR leadership perspective, the influencing piece for HR leaders is very different to, say, working in a very mature enterprise that's been in region for a long time. So I suppose my work, when I worked across Aluka Resources, Nissan, Microsoft Services, Fitness First, culturally, they were really bought into sort of the progressive HR initiatives, especially when it came to the employment legislation, talent, and being competitive in their sectors. Where startup, you're sort of starting from scratch. So you don't have the investment backing. You've really got to set pretty good budgets. And that sometimes is test and trial and takes a little bit of work to really influence, but you really need to influence well to get a strong EVP in region, to get the branding and the reputation side of things off the ground within the first 1 or 2 years. If that's not done well in a startup enterprise under a global in region, then it can be problematic.
Absolutely. You could fail fairly quickly in a new area.
Yeah, and I would also sort of say knowing the risk appetite that you have as a company, especially around that reputational risk across brand, because I think it's really vital if you really want to attract the best and the brightest. Are you really clear on your organizational design, your job design, and then the alignment of talent and understanding what talent can you actually afford? Because that's very different in a large entity, a mid entity, and then sort of a small startup. And I think now great talent, or if you look at your attracting the A's and the B's in terms of a talent strategy, they can go anywhere and they're very confident around their capability and skills and their value add. So it's really looking at how can us as HR professionals and leaders work with our key leadership teams and managers to really have a story that is aligned to our vision, but is actually authentic and real, and we can actually deliver on it. Because there is a lot of time, and I've worked for companies, or I've gone into companies in a transformation where they're selling something which simply isn't the reality. And I think now more than ever, that humanistic, authentic voice from people leaders and up to board CEO is just critical, and that has to flow really well. And great people will join and stay. Doesn't matter the size, doesn't matter the maturity of the organization, but it's how you can really sort of frame that piece. And I think that is going to be more critical, you know, into the future. It's certainly a differentiator now. And I think the other challenge, and I still see it, I think HR has moved a long way, but you've got to get the fundamentals right. So as a HR function and practitioner, the talent recruitment and the administrative payroll remuneration side just needs to work. And then the system side, which I think is the greatest challenge for organizations, are the systems and the policies actually working, right? Are some of them now redundant? in an organization. And I think we've seen a lot of change in a number of enterprises with how we go about, rewarding next to performance and giving feedback. And a lot of the standard tools simply are not working. Employees are not seeing them of value. And they're not reflective of the sort of attributes the organization really wants to foster. So I think any entity that is not reviewing their system architecture, and it's not integral to strategic outcomes, then that is a challenge that obviously needs to be looked at.
There are a few elements to consider in the context of opening an office in this new region, right? But getting the right organizational design, understanding what people you require, a good, strong leadership team that will be able to enable the organization to grow in the region. But also, when you were talking about recruitment, is having the right value proposition on the table, and also searching for the right talent pool that is suitable for a new business, for a startup.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I've learned, probably the difference of working in very highly mature organizations next to startup and greenfield sites, is the caliber of sort of the right fit of talent. So there's a lot of research on, obviously, having a specialist type of employee that is very one-directional, very much a master of their skill. And that might work really well in a really mature, well-structured organization that has very well-defined functions. But when you go into startup enterprise, or basically working from scratch, you need, especially in those first 2 years, people that might have a specialist bent or might have multiple specialist bents, but obviously are very happy to sort of roll up their sleeves, muck in, be very hands-on, do the whole stretch of understanding strategy, right down to obviously happy to turn on a printer and do some copying, or so the admin sort of side. And I think more and more now, and we're seeing this right across all sectors and organizations, if you're truly going to be efficient, especially from a cost base, you want, I suppose, less siloed functions where you've got more people with cross-functional skills, especially to cover employees that may go on leave or might have different life events, especially with the flexibility of work in that dimension, that you've got, a few people in your team that actually have got that shared knowledge where they can step in. And I think that's a great thing for organizations. We're now seeing that across large, medium, and also small enterprises, that it's more the attitude of the talent. And if you've got your structure and the job design right, then you're obviously going to choose the right caliber of person in that. Yeah, but that shifted the whole dimension of, I suppose, where most people started. 20 years ago, when I joined my first HR team, I started in a rem and benefits team in a HR function of 40 people. So my role was very much the same every day, and obviously I was bored after 6 months of doing that. But I suppose that sort of employee, I had the foresight back then in my 20s to basically say, this isn't going to be me, because I'm not challenged, I'm not stretched, I'm not seeing other sorts of things, even though I was sort of exposed to it. But that sort of caliber now in, I think, employment, we're seeing less and less. And with the emergence of AI, I think also that's something that companies will be looking at for the cost efficiency base. And a number of organizations are already doing that. What roles across all functions really are very methodical, repetitive, that can be easily replaced with AI technology. And we're seeing that, especially across the customer services sector, quite a bit now. And I think HR, it's not very widely, I haven't seen too much in the HR space sort of spoken about, but I think there are a number of roles that simply will be redundant into the future.
Yes, that's very, very good point, Rachel. Can you share success stories where a specific HR strategy had a transformative impact on the company growth or bottom line?
Yeah, sure. So there's probably two. I mean, I've done quite a few different projects, and a lot of my experience to date is more sort of the HR consulting, change management, transformation. But I was fortunate, sort of around, I think it was around 2011, 2012, I was headhunted to go into the Nissan Group. And at that time, they really didn't have a generalist HR function. They really were doing a little bit of recruitment. They had a little bit of ER strategy across some of their manufacturing and warehousing, but really there was no function in place. So I would say to anyone out there that is thinking of how do you make that step change from not leading a team or having very limited HR management, the only way you get that, and I've said this to a number of people who have worked for me, is you've got to be given an opportunity, or you've got to seek an opportunity. So I had this opportunity come to me to pretty much go into Nissan Australia and set up a HR generalist function end to end and build a team. So basically within the first 3 months, there was no HR strategy plan. I worked with the CCO and their IR head at the time, and I pretty much had landed that HR strategy plan within the first 3 months. And that was my first ever experience at writing a HR strategy end to end. And that was obviously across a number. So basically, talent was critical. We were launching Infinity, the luxury car brand at the time in Australia. So there was a huge talent acquisition piece for that. We were integrating some of the Renault business in terms of systems and processes as part of the Renault Alliance with Nissan, as well as welcoming them into a new head office. We hired our trajectory was sort of a growth of over 100 FTE sort of across a 24-month period. So the evolution to sort of build and develop a lot of talent was also connecting with some of our local universities. We hired some second-year grads, predominantly with sales and marketing orgs. So that was sort of a partnership that, has been very long-serving within Nissan Australia. There were no system architecture platforms across performance appraisal. So even though the car company had been operating for some time, employees had no feedback. So basically implementing obviously online tools for connection, doing a lot of education with managers on how to give feedback or have difficult conversations, creating of an EVP. So when I stepped in, there was a beautiful website just promoting cars, but not promoting any people or career sort of pathways within the group. So I remember doing that very lean and mean. It was even with I think I had an iPhone at that stage, but it was taking pictures of employees and team members.
To share what it takes to join the organization, what are the positions available, opportunities, and what it takes to work, even though it wasn't fancy or anything, but from nothing to
get the basics in place. And and the location at the time, it was sort of in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne. It wasn't near the city. It was like an hour out. Just to obviously that EVP was critical. What can we offer? Obviously, given that we want to attract talent closer to the city, but they're going to have to travel an hour out. We were fortunate that we could package cars as part of that offering, but obviously really extending a lot of the site-based services as well. Development was critical. The other, it was end to end really. We achieved as a collective team within 9 months, pretty much we had the core generalist HR function in place. So pretty quick in a sense, because that's pretty unheard of when you've got a 600 org, FTE org at that stage, and we sort of grew it to, you know, over 750. But the other interesting thing, and I think a lot of my career has been trying to pinpoint people risk, especially for the leadership group, the CEO, in terms of conversations that I would regularly sort of have. And that's a flavor that's continued on throughout my career, and obviously more critical now at board, with that oversight to ensure that the function is sound and solid and there's no reputational exposure. But the safety side, back then we had casting plants in manufacturing, we had warehousing, we had head offices, we had a network with multiple dealers across the states, and there was really very little in place in terms of physical and psychological safety. And that was a core area sort of my remit, to really be quite hands-on initially, going in and really establishing boundaries and communication awareness in terms of making sure to mitigate any particular risks. So yeah, I mean, that's probably one of my meatiest roles. The other thing I'm really proud about across the course of my career has been, I've taken on massive challenges in doing a number of subsidiary bills, medical devices, health, aerospace, aviation recently for Leonardo, but fitness first, I stepped into a number of years ago, had a team of 20 people, had a HR business partner team that actually weren't business partnering with the clubs in terms of where we derived our revenue. When I stepped in, there was an enterprise agreement. No one understood the enterprise agreement that had been negotiated. So again, coming back to, okay, do you understand the legislative landscape and the sector and the requirements in which you actually employ people? And just the knowledge. So I suppose the interesting insight there, although I've worked in a lot of, you know, professional businesses where you've got highly, I suppose, academic university type graduates that simply have the foresight and the awareness. Sometimes in other sectors, you can't make the mistake that your employee group is going to have the same awareness or maturity of thinking and understanding. And I come from a vast fitness background myself. It's sort of, I live and breathe health and fitness, and I've been an athlete certainly in my 20s and in 30s, and I've competed for Australia in different things. And so I get the energy and the motivation, but as an employee, and especially if you're promoted to a manager, do you actually understand the fundamentals that you need to understand to employ and to look after people and ensure that you're, you know, paying them correctly, or you're caring for them in terms of their career growth, their safety? Are they actually achieving, aligned to some sort of plan? And it was quite staggering to see that even though the business had been around for some time, a lot of the fundamentals weren't in place. So that was a huge educational top down. And successfully across my tenure there as a consulting sort of assignment, I negotiated a new enterprise agreement that really was competitive cross-sector, also introduced the first paid parental policy in the fitness industry. And I remember walking into clubs years later, and some of the club managers, the guys would come up and sort of say, listen, I actually took parental leave and I took that policy to sort of support my partner or wife at time. And that is lovely to hear. Absolutely. When you get that diversity. Yeah, so they would probably be some of the key successes, across my career today.
That's great, Rachel. Great benefits for the business and the people that work for the organization, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose one of the differences, you know, which sort of aligns to, I suppose, how I lead as a HR leader in most of the entities, probably back from pretty much from my Nissan days through to Fitness First, through to Microsoft Services, you know, BSN, Essity, and then Leonardo. What I have done in all of those entities. As a practitioner, I've always written my own deck, sort of that PR for HR in a way. If you want to get influence and a seat at the table within an organization, or build that partnership with the CEO, the MD, the directors of different functions, then how are they going to respect you, and how do they actually buy into what HR does outside of simply recruiting talent and paying people? And I think that is a traditional, when we study HR, that's what everyone sort of foundationally has studied. But we know the best HR operators and the best organizations that have the best functions, they're highly strategic. They've got the core elements or pillars of HR simply working, but it's then the communication, the influencing tools back to the org strategy and the outcomes, which obviously are delivering the profits. And I think a lot of leaders or managers that haven't studied HR foundationally, or probably have never seen that sort of strategic, progressive type of function, they simply don't know. So I basically write, I call it HR 101, and I take obviously all my leaders through it, and I take all my team through it. And over the last few years, I've embedded a number of team members into helping contribute or present some of that deck. So therefore, they're also getting that influencing piece, especially HR business partners. If you, as a leader, have a team of HR business partners that you really want to see flourish in an organization, it makes my job a lot easier if they're really well equipped and they're respected, because then I don't have to jump into those conversations, and it saves me a lot of time. So I think that's just a tool fundamentally, but it's amazing how many orgs I've gone into where a lot of HR people just simply don't have the foundational stuff. They've never really been exposed. And it comes back to, again, we were talking about the specialists next to the, you know, the type of capable talent that's really well-rounded. If you understand what an organization is trying to achieve, from the strategic bit down to the functional bit that you play into that strategy, down to your role within the function and the org, and you're really impactful and you can see the end to end, then you know exactly where you play, but you also know where other functions and other people play. And unfortunately, a lot of talent, especially more in larger to mid-sized organizations, they're not shown that. Wow. So one of the things that I love to show leaders, I love to show my team members, is the whole, the end-to-end of not only the HR employment cycle with all the different pillars, but how all of those components link back to organizational strategy and output, as well as the linkage with finance, with sales and marketing, with procurement. Because if you don't understand that, then how can you really be influential? So
absolutely,
it's probably, and I know there's a lot, the progressive movement, I suppose, in HR practitioners that get that, they're forging a different flavor, especially at board and CEO level. But I think that that's, to me, still, it's quite new. And I've always had that. I know I operate differently, but I've always been fascinated with organization and organization output, because everyone wants to be working for a successful entity. You always want to be ensuring that your organization is profitable, that you are aware of any risks, that you're working to overcome those, or you're being transparent down the chain. If you need to restructure or transform, that your people are not simply, you know, receiving a letter which is not very humane. They're actually understanding, well, this is the stage of maturity or evolution within organization. And business is around because businesses need to be profitable to be able to govern well, to be able to pay, you know, all of their bills when they're due. Like, it's just the fundamental sort of stuff. But yeah, the education, it's the communication through the influencing piece is critical.
Very well said, Rachel. I couldn't agree more. I wanted to ask you about a particular topic that is the overall employee well-being within leadership and HR practices. So can you tell us how to foster diversity, inclusion, and employee well-being?
Yes, from my sort of passion, more so in the last few years, I was fortunate to go to INSEAD, the campus in France, to do their C-suite women's program. And I was in the second cohort. I think it was just after COVID. Luckily, I could travel and attend that program. And it was probably the space with professionals that I actually found myself to be completely included in conversation in a cohort of professionals. And I don't think necessarily the gender, being a women, was an element. I just sort of think it was more the mindset of like-minded individuals that were committed to success in their careers and profession. They were all asking for the same things. And I don't think it's so much the gender, but I think if you look at the age aspect of diversity, I think a lot of entities are probably a little bit old school in their approach to promoting talent that they might not be necessarily in their 50s, 60s. To go into a senior leadership role, but they might be in their 30s and their 40s, and they might have worked exceptionally hard and they have the capability, or they might have more progressive capability and thinking. So it's more around working in organizations. And I've sort of looked at this and I've tried to challenge, I suppose, that mental bias in some ways, especially with leadership teams, more around promotion and succession. Are leaders actually looking at their people's skills and capabilities and performances, not necessarily their age, their gender, their years of tenure? And I think the companies that certainly are doing that, and I think Telstra was one a few years ago who basically promoted onto their board one of their females that was in her 30s or early 40s, exceptionally young, a different mindset of thinking. So from a diversity perspective, the metrics are key. And what I've noticed in a lot of organizations I've stepped into, again, it comes back to the system architecture. Can you actually thrive? The core demographics across your workforce, and are they accurate? And are you making decisions based off the performance appraisal tools and feedback? Do you actually have objective, real, transparent, feedback on your people where you can actually make good decision making in terms of succession and promotion based on some of that information? And I suppose in a lot of organizations now, the performance appraisal, they just play lip service to it because employees don't feel that it really adds any benefit, or they may not have managers equipped to really give it balanced type of feedback. And I've certainly done a lot of coaching with leaders to look at both sides, have the difficult conversations. Don't be afraid to sort of document that. If you feel that you have employees that may not progress above a certain level or may not be able to transform into the future. So at Microsoft Services, when we were going into the cloud, that account managers to be able to have conversations with different stakeholders, not a single stakeholder that they've been sort of communicating with for the last decade. Some people were able to transition, some people simply weren't. But is the data that you're having sort of access to, does that help aid some of those conversations, and are you being real and transparent? So I think definitely on diversity and inclusion, it's the mindset thinking. Are you bringing people into project teams that are not all the same look and feel and the same style? Do you have some of those people on teams who are happy to challenge the status quo? Are you hiring diversified talent? And are you not just ticking a box to ensure that you've got a proportion of females? If the females are not capable, well, it shouldn't be based on gender, it should be based on capability. But obviously, if there are emerging females that might lack some of the skills, you've identified that on succession slates and you're developing them to be capable and competent. The one thing that I've seen a few times, especially in more the engineering sort of side, is there is, number one, a lack of females next to men with the skills and capabilities. But sometimes women are thrown into situations where managers or leaders might think that they're capable and competent, but they're actually putting that talent at risk, rather than, they're thinking that they're trying to give them an opportunity. But to give an opportunity without developing a person correctly to be safe and competent and confident is a risk to that individual.
Yep.
That's setting them up for failure. So the other thing I think is great is around, again, just having a look at the groups, especially in different project opportunities that are running in an organization, different initiatives across sustainability, even involvement in people and engagement initiatives. And do you have diversification across your employee group, from your SLT to your management level, to your grads, to your middle managers? So you've got full representation, and it's more representation of also allowing them to have a voice. So as an organization, are your decisions made collectively from multiple voices, just not a single voice? And I think that there's still a long way to go there, but it's set those mechanisms. And it's more than just having the data to do statutory reports. The data, hopefully, is real and transparent. And if a director was to walk through an organization, they're seeing those initiatives in action that are obviously represented in their reports and statistics. And I think there is some way to go a lot in organization for people to really feel that. And I think women probably really need to see that more so. And a lot of junior employees and a lot of graduates are simply asking for that. So I think it's exciting times when we're moving into more inclusion and diversity and equity, especially across pay equity. But I think it should just be given in all entities these days.
Yes, absolutely. I think it has to do with what works for your business. It's just probably looking it through the lenses of diversity and inclusion, understanding your data, and understanding how that works for your business as well. For instance, in many construction companies that have a development plan for women in engineering to really try and encourage women to get in the industry and grow within the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I've seen more and more, especially across the last few years, if you look at the development and we talk about the diversification of careers and how do employees sort of, maneuver across their organizational, maneuver their career across a sector. And I think I've seen in larger entities or mid to large size entities that are quite mature and established to have pretty clear talent slates and talent succession plans, and to involve your talent in those conversations. It's pretty easy. But when you look at small businesses that have limited sort of maturity or scale over time, how do you sort of attract and retain the great talent that you hired at the start? It's really down to that diversification of knowing your talent really well and understanding where they may want to move, or also when they're working for you. I do a lot of work with managers to basically talk about the strengths sort of side of their skills and capabilities, and maybe where they could go based on those strengths and capabilities, and having discussions across that. And that might be inside the business, but there might become a time if the business is limited with its growth and its scale that they may have to go outside into a mid to large size player to go that sort of next level if they've got aspirations on their career. And I think some of the most successful people that have transitioned their career, and I say this to people who have worked for me, it's not that I'm going to provide them as a leader with all those insights and the strategy to move over their career and tell them where to go. It's basically my role as a leader is to give honest, transparent feedback, give them insights on where I see their strengths, their weaknesses, maybe some opportunities that they haven't thought of, sort of planting the seeds, but also endorsing them. And I think that's the thing. I mean, I look back to my early career, there were really two people that really stood out for me. One was a South African, one was from the UK. And I'm not sort of saying that that's different because I operate in Australia and New Zealand, but I suppose I'm quite an international person.
Yes.
And I come from an international background. And so I suppose the dialogue of conversations, and they just they trusted me enough to let me go and try things. But they would never give you that much feedback that you're doing a great job or this is where you should go, Rachel. They would simply endorse, plant the seeds. And then if you've got the smarts, you can really take your career wherever you want. But I think having people around you, and at INSEAD, when I did the course, they basically called it men have a greater posse of supporters on the whole. And that could be very generalistic, but research basically says, on the whole, men have the greater posse of mateship in work around them. So when comes a promotional opportunity, they sort of support one another. But females, as they go through their career, they don't really cultivate that to the same extent. And I think that's changing. It is important, I think, for all employees, if they've got aspirations to move their career, to seek out that feedback, to ask for it. And I love graduates. I've done a lot of engineering grad programs and obviously sales and marketing grad programs. And I just love the grads on the programs that keep asking questions. They're curious. Sometimes they can be frustrating because they're so curious and they're always inquiring about stuff, but you just know instinctively they're going to go somewhere. They actually care. They're ambitious. They're energized. They want to know. And I think that is the future of talent. And I think you've got to be able to harness that as well in an organization. You can't have 1,001 of that personality because as a leader, that's pretty demanding to manage. But I think there is that energy. And it's simply when we look at diversity and inclusion, to be included, to be accepted and respected, sometimes you've got to ask for that. You've got to give that feedback to change the status quo. You've got to be able to call stuff out. And I think that's part of my success as a female leader is I'm pretty direct. I don't suffer fools. And I've been very happy to call things out when I've seen things that are not appropriate. And that might be for myself or it might be for another colleague. But I think that's really important. That starts the change dialogue of how we build a great culture in organization.
Absolutely. Great point, Rachel. And with this, do you have any tips or advice when it comes to creating and maintaining a highly engaged workforce?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I think it comes back to the core of when you look at your talent strategies. Do you have your org structure right? Do you have job design right? Are you aligning talent to your organizational values and purpose? Is the talent capable? And are they high performing? So I suppose the one thing through the interview process that you really want to look for, do they have the energy? Do you feel confident that they can do the job? Are they engaged through the process? And you're not just looking at their CVs impressive. Is the person you're actually meeting with an impressive candidate? And do you feel that they'll work well in partnership with the leader of that function, with the other team members? I think more so now, more than ever, they need to be a team player. That is really highly critical. And it's the people experience piece. So what I've seen done really well and also really poorly is you hire great talent, you might lose them in the first 3 to 6 months because your people experience hasn't aligned to the process that you put to attract them in the first place and on which they, accepted to join. So the continuity of your talent practices into your onboarding, into your people experience, into the transparency and the authenticity of how you've sold through your EVP, the organization to them. Do they actually feel that? And then in order to really build the best team and get the best outcomes, it's then the communication and management piece of an employee across, is your system architecture and IT working? Does the employee actually have the ability to work and perform their best work because your system architecture, is functional? And I think I've also seen a lot of organizations, probably more in smaller or startup, where you've hired great people, but they can't work because the tools simply haven't been well invested in. And then that's led to disengagement. And then pretty much if you've got really great superstars that are used to operating away, you'll never keep those people if you don't really have highly functional sort of systems.
Absolutely.
And the connection, again, with the org strategy, the performance and the outcomes, and how you set your KPIs around that talent, and then how you remunerate those people. I think if you have all those elements working well, you've got a respectful organization free of bullying, harassment, will really feel comfortable and safe. And that partnership with their manager is working well, then you'll have a really highly engaged employee that will want to stay. Retaining them will be the evolution of, do you understand the person well? Do you understand their needs? Do you understand if they're challenged or they're really comfortable? There are some people that just will tell you. I remember in Microsoft, there were some people that sort of said, Rach, I'm not interested in being promoted. I'm really loving this job. And I think that's really important as a leader to know as well, because you need people like that in an organization. Not everyone necessarily wants to transition. And it's knowing why people stay. I think that's critical. What is the driver for someone joining? Why someone stays? And are they staying and performing? Are they staying and flourishing? Or are they just staying because it's secure and comfortable? I would also challenge, is that the right thing in your talent sort of strategies? Do you actually want people that like maybe the culture, but they're not performing? What are you doing about that? Because I think especially now, I think more companies, especially if we do go into recession, a lot of other companies will have to look at that. A lot of the IT companies have had too many layers of employees in their structure, and they're looking obviously to get those efficiencies. But I think if you're an organization that is not close on how your talent is performing, and you don't, again, have the data and insights across that, then I think that's an area to investigate. And I think government's a little bit behind across some of that sort of stuff. But I think as a leader and as an employee, I'm always conscious of that. It's like, how am I contributing? What is my outcome? Am I adding value? If I'm not adding value, well, am I clear that the activity I'm doing, is it essential? So I work with a lot of my teams across, is it a value add activity? Is it just to run the business? Is it a nice to have? Can we afford that nice to have? What is that nice to have activity actually doing? So And again, I probably would say I took that from my consulting sort of background, where you sort of have to minute all your activity. But I think it's good to be on top of that. Is the work that you're doing in a given week next to the plan that you're working? What percentage have you added value and in what category? And if you're not thinking that way, then again, it's that mindset of really, why are you in business? Why are you turning up?
Yeah.
And that is probably more progressive. And obviously people that work more in that consulting space get that really well because they're paid on that basis. But I think you can't be salient in an organization or in a position. And I think it's one of the things I see on leadership teams. Again, and it comes to your question sort of around highly successful teams and that engagement and retention. But is your leadership team the right mix and caliber of people? Or have they simply been promoted there because they've done their tenure in an organization? They're liked. Are they actually delivering, contributing? Are they sending the right messages to their people? Are they truly on board? Do they have the energy? And I think we're seeing this with the board at Qantas at the moment. There's been a lot of questions raised, and Qantas, even in their senior leadership team, have had to make a lot of changes. It's really ensuring that you've got the mix of the right people, and that changes with the different strategic direction of organization. And I think we're going to see that more and more now.
Absolutely. Great point, Rachel. And with that comes having the right leadership in place, the people that are going to nurture your teams and help you grow and achieve the business success. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Pam. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to the People Relations Podcast. We hope that today's discussion helps you find new ways to make better people decisions within your business. For additional insights and resources, remember to visit our website at peoplerelations.com.au. If you found value in this episode, please like and share the show with your friends who are dedicated to running and growing their businesses. We can't wait to have you back next time for more great conversations. Until then, take care and see you soon.